Hello, this is Professor Randy Minton, and today what I want to do is go over a more comprehensive type problem. And this problem, by the way, is not in your books. It will cover chapters 19, 20, and ultimately 21, but the overhead is so great when you start doing these things that I'll have to do it in stages. So this is part one. And since when I talked to some of you, I got the feeling that maybe you didn't quite understand how some of the Excel stuff works. I thought it might be also useful to put some of the Excel formulas that I'm going to use in there so you can see exactly what I'm doing. The first thing that we have to do here, what we're going to first do is we're going to create an income statement using variable costing and an income statement using absorption costing. And I'm just going to point you to something right here that says that part one assumes that production is equal to sales. Recall that when production is equal to sales, absorption costing and variable costing yield the exact same numbers. In addition to that, if we have time for this video, I'm going to do the contribution margins, but I'll have to just kind of see how it plays out and how much time is being consumed before I do that. Okay, well, in this particular case, we have Minton Specialty Tires, and we have three tires: a basic tire, a racing tire, and an exotic tire. And we're gonna give each one of these different units some sales in units and some sales price, a sales price, a variable manufacturing cost, a fixed manufacturing cost, and so forth. And what I've done and what I always do in these things to save time and overhead, I've got these different parts of the spreadsheet tied together, and I've already created some of the things. So this, for example, is the absorption costing income statement. And as I apply numbers up here, this one will fill in, but I'll come back and I'll show you exactly what's happening and how that it gets created. Okay, so without further ado, let's put in some sales in units, and we'll call this one 140,000. And this one 36,000, and the last one 20,000. And the sales price per unit, give this one 20, this one 110, whoops, 110, and the last one 200. And then variable manufacturing cost per unit, we will call that 8 for the first one, and 65 for the second one. Remember, you could look at these sales dollars and see that the costs are going to go up fairly substantially. And then in the last one, $120 per unit. Fixed manufacturing costs, in this case we'll use 700,000 and 800,000, and the last one, let's call it 820,000. Variable selling and administrative costs per unit, we'll assign the first one $3, and then the next one $1. And since that last one's kind of high in terms of its selling price, we'll give it kind of a proportional amount for selling and administrative expenses on the variable side, and call it 20. And then lastly, we have to assign some fixed selling and general and administrative expenses. So we'll call this one 120,000 and 180,000 for the next one, and finally 240,000. Okay, so these are our salient facts about this particular company and its products. Because we have three different products, when we start to do things like contribution margin, break-even analysis in particular, we have to now start looking at some sort of weighted averages, because we have to get an enterprise-wide contribution margin and so forth. So let's take a look first, though, at what the variable costing income statement would look like. And these numbers, you'll be able to see, if I point to this first one, you can see that what I've said is that if there's a number in this field up here, and there is, that to put that number down here, and if there is no number, just leave it blank. And I've done that pretty much all the way through. Now notice that what I also did was I gave these a particular value, and so when I put the dollar signs in here before the A and the 23, what I'm really specifying is that it always has to use that particular cell for the calculation. It can't use a relative reference, it has to use a fixed reference. So normally what Excel likes to do is it likes to use relative references. So as you drag things across, and you'll see this in a minute, well, I'll just do one over here. If I want to add these three items up, I come up here and I'm going to click on the auto sum, and notice it already intuitively expects that I want to add up these three right here, and I do. So I'm going to click OK or enter, and when that happens, it totals up these three columns, or these three columns. So if I want to now add up the next three columns in row 2, or 22 in this case, all I have to do is point to the lower right hand side of the cell. When it makes the cross, I'm going to hold my left mouse button down and just drag it down once, and notice that it automatically then recalculates this. But what it's done now, if I point you back to the cell formula, notice that this one is F21 through H21, and if I point to this next one that we just drug down, it's F22 through H22, and that's what we call a relative reference, because it's moving down one row each time. So if we can actually do that if we want through the entire range, and that'll give us our totals, and we probably would have to give it some sort of a heading up here at the top. Now notice that when we come down here, we had the same numbers for our income statement, operating income. Notice 440, 604, and 140. If I come down here, I have 440, 604, and 140. And the difference, however, is going to be that in the first part of the variable manufacturing income statement, I have a couple of things that don't exist in the second one. The first is manufacturing margin, and we only have manufacturing margin when we have the need to isolate variable costs, and we have actually a manufacturing income statement that we're producing. And you also have here contribution margin, and as you'll remember, you cannot calculate break even without contribution margin, so you need that in order to make that particular calculation. Notice that in the case of variable costing, I have isolated here all of your fixed expenses. They're not up in this upper section, and the reason is because we treat those as period costs for the variable income statement as opposed to the fully absorbed income statement. Notice that when we do it on this side, on the absorption costing, we have our fixed manufacturing up here, and instead of having manufacturing margin and contribution margin, what we have is a thing called gross margin. Okay, so some of the semantics change whether you're using absorption costing or variable costing, and recall that absorption costing must be used for external purposes. That is, when we report to the SEC or our stockholders or wherever, we're going to do that using full absorption costing. And the key to remember when we're doing it, and why there's a difference, is as long as the production is equal to sales, there is no difference. That's why in this case, if I go ahead and do the auto sum over here and then pull all these right down, you'll see that for the bottom line it's still 1,184,000, irrespective of whether I'm using absorption costing or variable costing. However, if our production exceeds our sales, then that means that we're going to create more in ending inventory. And the calculation under absorption costing, when you have an ending inventory, is to subtract that from your cost of goods sold. So the lower the cost of goods sold, the higher the income. So conversely, if you were looking at a variable costing statement that had less production than you had in sales, then the opposite will be true. Then variable costing will yield a higher income. And you'll see that as we move forward in part 2 and 3 and so forth. But I think for right now I'm going to limit this particular video to just this part so that you can see that when we have production that is equal to our sales, we get the exact same answer for operating income under either method. Thank you for your attention.